All right, welcome to Halitics. So glad to be talking today. It is a Wednesday hump day, and also great to have you on, Andy. Thanks. I really appreciate your joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here, Hal. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I tell you what, beyond having you on, what I appreciate even more is that you're taking on the Duopoly, the Unitary Party, whatever you want to call it, running for governor. We show you there, candidate for Maryland governor 2026. And I think it's really exciting. I want to apologize. I mean, maybe apology is the wrong word. I'll just say I'm sorry I couldn't make your kickoff, but I was pretty sick and it was cold and I didn't want to get anyone else sick either in early January.
No, I totally understand that. We would have loved to have you there, but it was indeed very cold. It was, 30 degrees with 25 or 30-mile-an-hour winds, and everybody there was bundled up. I guess it got colder after that, but that day definitely felt cold. We'll be doing more things in Annapolis. We'll be doing more things around the state, so I'm sure you'll get out to one of them, Hal.
Oh, definitely will, more than one, I hope, and also make sure you get on the ballot here as well. There's a lot to get into, and I was kind of debating, should we talk about strategy? Should we talk about organizing? But I think given that you and Governor Moore are the only two announced candidates, and I showed you this, I thought maybe we could just get into kind of the stark difference. I mean, this isn't close. People think, oh, the Democrats are progressive, the Green Party. Why is there this overlap? Why do they? But if you look at the issues, I'm confident that matter to Marylanders, most will see that there's a critically important difference between you guys. I say guys because two men on the issues. I put this up. These were kind of what jumped out at me. Differences, what matters to me. Do you want to start with any one or go right down from top to bottom?
So let's go down from top to bottom. We can do that. But let me say first, real quick, I think that the most progressive the Governor Moore is going to be has already passed. That he and his party think that Governor Hogan is going to run again in 2026. And so they are already figuring out how to move to the right on as many issues as they can so they can be as close to Larry Hogan as possible, and take away the ability of voters to have a real choice. So as much as he is as far as he got on any of these issues, that's as far as he's going to get. Watch the next 2 years for him to pull everything back to the right and sell it as tough choices when really he's afraid of Larry Hogan.
That's pretty fascinating analysis. Maybe we can dissect that a little bit. You did mention that, by the way, the website for Andy is is gogreen2026.com. It's right there on the screen. It's also in the show description. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can access the response that you made to the state of the state by the governor earlier this year.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, we put out our state of the state response last week, on Wednesday night. I know you're going to show that clip in a bit, and we'll be happy to get into that at that point. But yeah, I mean, I think this list that you have here, Hal, is a pretty good comparison of
Well,
where
let me just real quick on the governor, because you mentioned, and the reason I also mentioned the state of the state is because you mentioned in that, I believe, or maybe it was somewhere else I heard it, that the governor is going to respond to a threat by former Governor Hogan. Do you think that's the right? I mean, putting aside your progressive politics, your pro-human, your pro-life policies, I don't want to let the anti-choice movement co-opt the word or term pro-life. You're pro-life. Do you think that it's a smart strategy for Democrats to kind of move to the right to try to ape the Republican policies? Is that a good strategy to get to win?
I mean, I guess it depends on what it's a good strategy for. If it is for the Democrats to win and protect their veto-proof majority in both houses so that they can kick the can down the road every year when people need something of them, yes, I think it's probably a decent strategy. In some ways, I also think that it exposes him on a lot of things. Like, I think when he moves right on immigration and does everything he can to line up with the Trump administration while saying nice words about specific immigrants, I don't think that's going to help him. And when he moves to the right on education and environment, I don't think that's going to help him. But I get why they think that's the strategy. That's the easiest way to take on Larry Hogan, is to make it a comparison of the two people, and have the policies be as similar as they can. I think they think that works for the way that for the way that Moore campaigns and the way that Hogan campaigns.
All right, let's get into the comparison then. Starting with Healthy Maryland, that is actually a bill that I believe Sheila Ruth, a Democrat, introduced. Maybe she stepped back a little bit. There's no hope in the Democratic General Assembly that'll pass. But tell us about that particular bill, your support for it, and the governor's opposition.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I don't know, I don't know all of the details of this bill, but I believe that it is a bill that is sort of single payer at the state level, is how I understand it. And look, I think there's a lot of good debate in a pure world about whether state level single payer is the way to go. And I think in a world in which Congress might have ever moved on it, there was some risk 4 and 5 years ago in the states moving in this direction and taking the energy away from Congress. But at the end of the day, healthcare is a human right, and that means that as policymakers in the state of Maryland, we need to make sure that nobody is denied healthcare. And the best way to do that at this point, especially given the Trump tax cuts that are likely to come, or the Trump cuts that are likely to come, is to do something where the state becomes the guarantor of coverage, not the guarantor of insurance, but the guarantor that anybody who walks in the door can get coverage, at the point of service. I don't know, again, I don't know all the details about the bill. I don't know all the intricacies of it, but I know as a fundamental concept, I believe that healthcare is a human right, and that means that the state has to ensure that nobody is denied it.
Just real quick on that bill, it was written to direct a task force to put together a plan, to propose a plan for single payer at the state level, and then to implement it. In other words, it wasn't, we'll put together a plan, debate it. It was like, put together the plan and then do it, because the recognition is this is not only better for the people of the state as a whole, it's also much more efficient. It saves money. It would make the state a more attractive a destination, for example, for businesses, for employers.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think the details need to get worked out. And I think it is important to study it because it's complex. And at the state level, trying to deal with the multiple levels of federal bureaucracy and all of the insurance plans and things like that, it does require study. But it is important to study and then act, not just study instead of acting, which seems to be the way that most things that have a study attached to them in Annapolis pass.
All right, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646 if you want to join us. If you have a question for Andy, please jump right in. And I just want to explain where I got my X's from, where I have an X next to more. Really quick, the governor actually, and there was an article about this in the Baltimore Banner. I'm not sure if Maryland Matters has covered it yet, Andy, but a very active and pretty notorious pro single payer activist from Annapolis, Chrissy Holt, who happens to be a personal friend, looked to be poised to take a seat in the Maryland House of Delegates. She had garnered enough support from the Anne Arundel Central Committee to be tagged as a replacement. And the governor stepped in and he said, nope, we're going with the other guy. And that, I believe, was because she is known. Chrissy is very well known as a pro-healthcare, pro-single-payer advocate. She's taken on the lobbyists for, the Johns Hopkins Medical Center, the University of Maryland Medical Center, Health Center. She's taken them on, and they don't like it, and they don't want her voice being heard in the halls of power.
Yep. No, and I mean, I would look for more in Ferguson and the leaders in the state assembly to do more of that as we get closer to next year's election. They're gonna put their thumb on the scale when delegates are being appointed. They're gonna put their thumb on the scale when senators are being appointed. They're gonna have arm twisting behind the scenes to get people to withdraw bills so that they don't have to vote against them and veto them. The most progressive language you will ever hear coming out of Westmore its pinnacle will be leading up to Election Day in 2024, and from there it will be a downhill slide to the right.
Let's get to the next item, unless you have anything else you want to quickly add to the Healthy Maryland or healthcare discussion. And I'll just let you, jump back whenever you want. Do whatever you like, Andy. This is your forum. But Maryland Mass Transit, you have really centered public transit in your literature and in your videos. So talk a little bit about why this is critically important for our state.
Yeah, I mean, mass transit is essential to working people being able to get to work, to be able to make sure that they can get their kids to school. Mass transit is an essential element for Maryland that works for more people. We can't force people to have cars. We can't force people to to take ride shares that are now extra taxed in order to get to work. We have to be able to provide means of people to get from where they live to where they work and to where they worship, where they attend school, and where they play. I was in Frederick a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to a guy who really wanted to be able to take his son down to DC using the MARC train on a weekend because his son was really interested in seeing some of the museums. He didn't have a good, reliable car, and he couldn't take a MARC on the weekends because MARC doesn't run those type of times from Frederick, and he can't take a day off of work because he's a working person in this economy. And that type of thing, I think, shows that it is important not just for the sort of work, school type of things, but also for people to be able to enjoy the benefits of where our tax dollars go, to be able to enjoy recreation and things like that. Those things have been taken away from working people as well. And so, look, we've got to have a mass transit network that connects Maryland's population centers. We've got to be able to get from around the DC area, around the Baltimore area. We got to be able to get to Annapolis. We got to be able to get to Frederick. We've got to be able to get to Hagerstown and Cumberland, which are entirely isolated. Oftentimes I think we think about this transit question entirely in terms of people in the DC or Baltimore suburbs. It is important there, and we need to have more built out networks there. But the entire rest of the state is lacking in transit infrastructure. And if we want a state where everybody that works for everybody and where everybody can thrive, everybody needs to be able to use publicly funded rail and publicly funded bus as necessary in order to get to the places they need to go. And that's an investment we have to make. It's expensive. It's not cheap. In the past, we've relied on federal dollars. Those federal dollars aren't going to be there in the same way anymore. And so we got to figure out how to prioritize this, or the wealth inequality that we see is only going to keep growing, and the isolated places are going to get more isolated.
Well, before we went live, we briefly touched on the experience in New York City where they've implemented what they call congestion pricing. And as I think we both understand, that's had some really salutary effects. Did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that New York City doing congestion pricing gives us a real example of something that we can look at. We can see if it would work here in Maryland. And I hope that we can begin studying that as an effective means of funding mass transit, as effective means of generating small business, instead of like sort of taking the suburban Democrat position on it, which is it's a little bit less convenient for some people. I've seen some suburban New Jersey and Democrats railing against it. And it seems that the reason they're railing against it is because conservative suburban folks in New Jersey don't like it, and because it's popular to rail against it on social media. New York will give us a real opportunity to have some data and to understand who it benefits, who it helps, and who it costs a little bit more for. But I hope that data is available, and I hope we can use it to make good decisions about whether that works in places in Maryland.
Yeah, one of the I guess impacts that jumped out at me when I was reading about what's happened so far since congestion pricing has been enacted is that small businesses, especially restaurants, are actually not all of them, because there are some restaurants, especially on the west side of Manhattan, where you did get a lot of traffic from New Jersey, where people drive through the tunnels and go to steakhouses, especially on the west side. I'm aware of one that pretty well known steakhouse on the west side. Some of those may have suffered a little bit, but you're getting a lot more foot traffic, and on balance, there are actually more folks who are going out to eat because they can take because the streets are just less crowded with cars. So it's a more pleasant nighttime experience in Manhattan to walk around than it has been in the past.
And I think the other thing that we need to remember is that there's a cumulative impact of pollution on people in which cars are driving through. If your neighborhood is a place that people sit in traffic or drive through on their way to somewhere else, a fancy steakhouse, for example, your children are more likely to have asthma, your elders are more likely to have respiratory problems. So when we look at something that decreases cars or increases costs for a few wealthy people, we should also look at the cumulative impacts of the pollution on the communities that the highways are cutting through.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, though, that you saw some increase in business for small businesses because that
Yeah.
would address to a degree, not completely mentioned. Of course, we have to spend more money on trains, on public transit. It ain't cheap.
Yeah.
But if revenues from business increase, then that would help offset the problem.
Yeah, and look, like some of these things are transformations that we have to make in how we approach the world. And I'm not saying that like congestion pricing is necessarily a transformative policy, but we have to accept that some of the things that we've taken advantage of and taken for granted over the last 50 years of American society are gonna have to change if we want a more equitable society and we want a more sustainable and just society.
Well, you used the word transform, and you said also during just before we went online, just to people know where I got some of the stuff from, that the Trump administration, all the wrecking that shall we say is being done, is going to create transformative changes, many for the worse, but we need to acknowledge that and deal with that at the state level.
Totally. I mean, Maryland is in Trump's crosshairs, and it is not accidental that Maryland is in Trump's crosshairs. I imagine many of the people who he most dislikes, who work in D.C. and work in politics and work in government, live in Montgomery or Prince George's County. I think that Maryland is a deep blue state that he has no chance of winning. Larry Hogan has considered running for president. Martin O'Malley has considered running for head of the DNC, and Wes Moore has considered running for president. We have a tenth of our GDP, I think, at the state level comes from federal workers. 5% of Maryland's tax base is undocumented folks. We have huge science and nonprofit sectors, all funded by the federal government. He's going to take that stuff away. Democrats in Maryland might fight some of it, but ultimately, once they agree that there's waste, fraud, and abuse, the only question is going to be how much cuts happen, not whether Maryland's economy is drastically cut. And so we've got to start thinking about what it looks like to have a Maryland that doesn't have reliance on the federal government like it once did, not just for direct funding, but for employment, for contractors, for all of those things. And if we can't, nuclear powered data centers or whatever else Wes Moore talks about in his economic vision is not going to be enough to offset the 300,000 plus federal workers that live here, many of whom are going to be drastically affected by the Trump administration. So over the next decade, it is going to be transformative times. And we, folks who think about justice like you and I do, need to start thinking about what the institutions are going to be that replace the ones that are going to get taken down by Trump and Elon, and start figuring out what does it look like to get to something better. The Republicans have a pretty clear vision of the transformation they want. They want to benefit the wealthy. They want to strip out social programs. They want to strip out anything that helps the middle class in a lot of ways. And the Democrats seem to be begging them to just do a little bit less of that. We need to come up with a vision that is transformative, so that we value everybody and that works for everybody.
Well, you said something that I think is spot on too, Andy. Andy Ellis with us from the Green Party. By the way, people say, oh, this is House Valentine to Andy. This is House Valentine to the Green Party. Let me say this. Andy and I have disagreements on issues. We have definitely gone at it on certain issues. I'm not going to get into those right now because I think they're completely dwarfed and overwhelmed by the critical nature of moving away from the unitary party, the duopoly party that is so clearly on the side of the billionaire class. And that's both parties. That's not just the Republicans whatsoever. That's and beyond the billionaire class, the military-industrial complex that pits people, poor, struggling, and working people against each other so that they cannot unite or will not unite or choose not to unite against the elites. So that's the fight we have to fight. I mean, we're also facing the existential threats of the climate catastrophe, climate holocaust. And I think, Andy, you and I would agree right now, we're seeing, I mean, I think we're at greater risk of some kind of nuclear war or some type of worldwide military conflict. We're closer to that than we've been maybe since the 70s, 60s or 70s.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in some really perilous times right now. And I think that is the case as it relates to inequality. I think that is the case as it relates to workers' rights. I think that is the case as it relates to war. I think that is the case as it relates to climate change. And I worry that the Democrats do not truly recognize the degree of peril that we're in right now, and think that they can just sort of push on through it with fundraising and, call your congressperson type of tactics. And we need to understand that um, we're in a very bad place. There's all sorts of crises facing us, and in Maryland, like beyond the global crises, we're still dealing with the legacy of mass incarceration that occurred in Maryland. We're still dealing with the legacy of the several 100,000 people that Martin O'Malley illegally locked up on his pathway to power in Baltimore City. We're dealing with the burgeoning mass deportation crisis. We're dealing with the burgeoning mass eviction crisis, and all of these things are going to hit, and that is going to be combined with a vast decrease in federal investment in Maryland, which will fundamentally restructure our economy. Things are tough, and I don't want to pretend like things are not tough, but we have to have the ability to understand. We have to have, I think the slogan we've been using recently is we have to have the courage to imagine and the power to transform. And I think that's really true at this moment more than any other moment, is we have to think about the world we want and then figure out how to change the world we have to make it the world we want.
All right. The issues that I put together in the charter are intimately related, but I actually want you to talk about the next three, but in conjunction with something that you mentioned. I believe it's again in your response, and it is in your response to the governor's state of the state. And this I did not know, and I hope I got the fact right because I wasn't certain the way you phrased it, but I think you were clear. I just didn't understand it clearly. Is it accurate that Maryland has the highest percentage of Black residents who are incarcerated of any state? Is that accurate?
Near the top, I think number 3 in percentage of Black residents per capita that are incarcerated. But what we are number 1 at is the number of people who are in adult prison right now who got there when they were youth, and those are overwhelmingly Black folks. And so we have nationwide leading youth incarceration rates here in Maryland, and we're, I think, 3rd or 4th in per capita incarceration of Black people based on the population. And so, like, well, Wes Moore, and I mentioned this in our response to the state of the state. He says we're breaking the back of violent crime in the state of Maryland. What he doesn't mention there is that he's locking up more Black children and charging them as adults than any other state in the country, and that there's a bill in front of the General Assembly that would relax some of the automatic charging of adults that happens on certain crimes. It would still leave it up to a court. It would still leave it up to a judge, but they wouldn't be auto charged. And my guess is they will do everything they can to kill that bill, because being tough on crime is politically popular, and works well for the Fox 45 crowd, works well for the conservatives, and often appeals to middle-class Black folks who want to see Democrats be tough on crime.
Well, they're also the ones who are often victimized by crime,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah,
working class, middle class folks, regardless of the color
Right.
of their skin or nation of origin, are often the ones who are victimized. And they can look at, more affluent white suburban liberals like myself who rail against the police, who demand that we defend the police, and say, wait a second, maybe the police don't treat me as well as I want, but they're the only thing that protects me. But the
Totally.
real response, I think, is what you talk about. Let's have education. Let's have, better public schools, HBCU funding, fund the state of Maryland system, and rebuild those communities.
Yeah, and look, I mean, for the time being, like, we can talk about whether we want an abolitionist future or not as part of the utopian vision. But for the time being, there's going to be people who are incarcerated for things they do. And that's the current way that things are going to work. But we need to make incarceration the tool of last resort, not the only tool and the tool of first resort. And that tends to be one of the things that Democrats will do in order to deal with the fact that the societies that they're trying to put together are rife with inequality, rife with a lot of public safety. I think what any community wants is to be safe and have the police help protect and maintain their safety. But I think what a lot of communities feel is that they're both over policed and under safe. And so you get this thing where, a Black community in West Baltimore may have the highest concentration of police and arrests and also is not getting any safer, right? And so it feels like the only solution sold to people in those cases is police. And in fact, those communities know full well what is working. They know that there is, a diversion program that the church may run in order to help kids who have gotten in trouble. They know that there is an after-school program that is really good at engaging folks. And, Moore invests in some of those things via his Enough program, but he doesn't invest in them that much. He invests in them enough to sort of say, oh, isn't it cool that we're doing this? But he doesn't invest enough in them in order to be transformative and to allow those communities to heal and revitalize themselves. And I think if you look at, last year he instituted this Center for Gun Safety based on this public safety model of gun violence that the Biden administration put out. And really what that was a vehicle to funnel money to research institutions, to Hopkins, to folks like that, instead of figuring out how to put that same money in a community that has been working on its solutions to violence and needs the resources in order to ramp those programs up. And so that's what we need to do. We need to invest in the things that communities are developing in order that work, instead of giving our, well-heeled buddies at Hopkins another grant.
Well, you said something earlier in the program. I kind of want to circle back to that a little bit, or I actually brought it up. Well, you said how the Democrats in Maryland are trying to become more like Larry Hogan and moving to the right and try to push him further out, I guess, so that they can capture the center and the left, saying you got no other option but us. And this is exactly the same strategy that Kamala Harris pursued, right? That the Democrats pursued in the presidential race, where they nominated a prosecutor, somebody who talked, about her prosecutorial record, which was locking up a lot of people. She was not a progressive prosecutor. Actually, the record was not one of pro working class, pro family type prosecutor at all. It was kind of just the opposite. Somebody who was pro war, very clearly pro war, and it didn't work. It was a failed policy. I think what the Democrats are trying here, if they see it as a race just between Hogan and Moore, they may find a lot of voters will be turned off by this attempt to be Republican light.
Yeah, I think that they're going to find that immigrants and people who support immigrants are going to be upset. I think they're going to find people who want a real renewable energy approach are going to be upset. I think they're going to find people who oppose locking up more and younger Black children are going to be upset. And I think part of our role in this campaign is to not let them make that slide so easily, right? To put some gravity on the side of those folks I just mentioned, who can say to Wes Moore, look, if you abandon me, we might vote for him instead of voting for you. And to let him understand, with Hogan looming over the horizon, that he can't just run to the right at no cost. And so our goal over this year and over next year has to be to raise that cost for him, so that those folks who are bargaining for a better future for their community have a bargaining chip other than just like, please don't do it, which is what the Democrats rely on them having right now.
Right. And you're that bargaining chip, obviously. And I want to ask about you breaking through. So it's not just like, well, if you don't do what we like, we're going to vote for Andy. It's more like we're voting for Andy regardless of what you do. We'll get to that in just a moment. I do want to note in the chat, we do have great guests. So I'm happy to see. Thank you, Andy, for that. Yeah, let's get into how do you break through? I know we got other topics. You alluded to Green Maryland. I think, hopefully your proposals would lead to more jobs for the very folks that need that little boost, and also to replace the lost federal work that we're talking about. But before we get maybe more into the other topics there, which I think are very important, breaking through. We saw the Democrat Party do everything possible to suppress the Stein-Ware vote. This is what worries me, right? Is that for whatever reason, people seem so closed to the idea of voting outside that box, that Republican vote box.
Yep. So, I mean, look, I think it is going to be a daunting year to break through, but I think it's essential that we do the work to be able to begin to build the power in order to get different outcomes. The best third party race and for governor in the state of Maryland is 3.75%, and that was a Prohibition Party candidate back in like early 1900s or something like that. So if we get past 3.75%, we're sending a clear message to folks that the status quo is not working, and we're sending a clear message that I often say it would be great if I win and Dana and I get to move to Annapolis and take our cats and chickens to the governor's mansion. But we can look at those numbers and see that the best candidate as a third party governor's candidate is in 3-4% range. So what does it mean to shoot for 3 or 4%, 5%, 10%, whatever it is? What I think it means is that we start to see power in Maryland and political power in Maryland as something that is not simply begging the Democrats to pass our bill this year, that is not simply showing up and giving a 3-minute testimony in Annapolis so that our nonprofit organization can fundraise off of it for this year, but is instead forcing the hand of politicians to actually pay attention to the people that they're ignoring, and to have consequences for them if they don't do so, right? Like, in a lot of ways, the Stein-Ware campaign got all of the smoke that they got from the Harris campaign, like running TV ads and hundreds of millions of dollars, because they understood that they had the power in order to force the genocide question onto the ballot, and that forcing the genocide question onto the ballot was really bad for the Democrats. We saw the consequence of that, and so I don't know what breaking through. I don't know that breaking through means that we live in the governor's mansion. I think breaking through means that Maryland begins to politically realign in a way in which workers and people who are ignored and left behind have power to demand outcomes that are beneficial to their community. And there is a party that can help them get those outcomes at first from the two parties, and then can use those victories in order to elevate itself into an elected role, as we get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it means you're part of the conversation. I think it means that people are saying, hey, Moore says this and Hogan says that, and they sound pretty similar, and it's a lot of pablum and it's political double talk. But we've got green folks saying, hey, this is what we're going to do to make life better in your community. I think that's what breaking through to me is. And and people don't look at you funny, like, what green? Like, if I mentioned Jill Stein, the response was invariably, oh, so you're for Trump, right? I mean, that's how people would react on the left. And that's not breaking through, unfortunately.
No, and I mean, in this case, people will say, "Oh, are you just trying to get Larry Hogan elected?" And it's like, absolutely, I'm not trying to get Larry Hogan elected. The Green Party filed an ethics complaint against Larry Hogan for his shady business dealings and his corrupt transportation contracts related to those. We will hit Larry Hogan as hard as we hit Wes Moore if he ends up becoming the nominee. We will also go after those folks in the Freedom Caucus who are trying to cheerlead Trump's destruction of Maryland's economy and talking about their fantasy of moving to Virginia. We're going to go after those folks too, because we think that we don't need just a party that is distinct from the Democrats. We need a party that is distinct from both the Republicans and the Democrats and offers a clear explanation of the problems and a clear vision of the solutions that people can identify themselves in and see how those changes would allow their lives to be better.
All right, I do want to get back to this chart. Maybe we can
Yep.
jump down just quickly to progressive state budgets. And I put that up because you made a great point. And again, Andy's response to the state of the state is at his website, gogreen2026.com. You made a great point, which is the governor has talked about a slight increase in the top marginal income tax rate, but he relies more on user fees and other direct taxes on poor, struggling, and working people as opposed to a progressive income tax.
Yeah, and so the governor's tax program, which he touts as progressive and taxing the wealthy, increases slightly the income tax percentage on people who make over $500,000 a year. And absolutely, people who make over $500,000 a year should pay more in income tax. But the fact that somebody who makes $400,000 a year is not paying more in income tax is some conception of our economy here in Maryland and in the nation that is vastly skewed by metrics that don't make sense. And so while I applaud him doing that, and while I applaud him ending the cliff for the child tax credit, it used to be that right now it's if you qualify for the child tax credit, you make $1 over the qualification and you fall off a cliff. That's bad policy, and I'm glad he's fixing it. But what we really need to do is to increase the tax on the people who are making, $300,000, $400,000 a year. The solution to the problem that we have right now is a simplified, transparent tax structure, and in which there are progressive brackets enough to pay for what we need at the state level. There is an adult deduction and a child tax credit. If we understand that those are the concepts we need, then we can move from there to a place where we're clear about what is getting taxed. Governor Moore says that there's no sales tax increase, but he's putting a 75-cent tax or 75 cent per transaction tax on deliveries. Well, that's a sale, and a lot of people are going to eat up the $150 in tax savings that he promises them in delivery fees. Last year he put a fee on Lyft and Uber rides. There's increased car registration fees. There's increased gas taxes. There's all of these things are increasing, nibbling around the edges because they don't want to tax the $300,000 people who make up the base of their political party, right? And so you have this situation where they will say, for example, we're not increasing the property tax. No, but they increase the assessed value of everybody's home by 10 to 20%. So they may not have increased the rate, but if they have the power to increase the base of assessment like that, they're increasing the property tax. And I think what is really frustrating is that people know this. People understand that they're paying more across the board. They understand that their local taxes are high. They understand that their property taxes are high. They understand that the sales tax has a bunch of kickers added onto it. And they feel like the income tax is high. And look, Maryland is a high tax state. If you live in Maryland, it's partially because you're okay with paying taxes. We could move to any of the nearby states that have much better tax structures. But people who live here, for the most part, are more okay with paying the level of taxes we have than the people who live in Virginia or Tennessee. And what frustrates me most is that the Democrats want progressive policy, but they don't want progressive taxation. The Republicans want regressive regressive taxation, trickle-down economics, regressive policy. They want all that. The Democrats want progressive policy without progressive taxation. And what we're saying is, like, we need progressive policy and progressive taxation. Like, let's pay for the things that we value. If we value
Well, I don't think,
education,
honestly, Andy, just to jump in real quick, and some of those fees I actually sort of like. Like, I think delivery fees make some sense. I understand the reason for them. The Uber fees, I think, I go back, I don't know, we could debate that. It's not that big a deal one
let
way
me
or the
say this
other
out.
to nitpick. But the bottom line is what you're saying is rather than rely on taxing the wealthiest Marylanders who can easily afford to pay more, the Democrats are looking for any alternative, including a particularly pernicious one that Vanessa Atterbury in Howard Howard County has floated, which is to increase the ability of folks to engage in casino gambling at home, which is a terrible, terrible thing.
Right. Look,
So,
let me say
but
this.
I would actually argue that democracy cannot thrive if you have a billionaire class. I would say that there's a benefit to taxing the wealthy that means government has enough to provide the services it should provide. But another benefit is we actually forcibly reduce wealth and income inequality so that you don't have generational, multi-generational wealth.
Totally. And so, like, I want to go back to the delivery fees and the Uber fees real quick. If the governor had set out a plan to increase delivery fees so that we could help workers who are taken advantage of by corporations in the delivery industry, sign me up. I'll pay those fees, right? But he's not doing it for that reason. He's doing it to fund the rest of his programs that don't necessarily help those workers, because he realized that people are willing to pay corporations those fees. And so he's like, well, let us get in on that hustle. It looks like a good hustle, right? And so if they were there trying to make it so that we had more local economies and workers were better taken care of in those industries, I would pay the fee with no problem. But that's not the goal. The goal is to make revenue. Same thing with gambling, right? Like, if gambling were already legal and they wanted to increase the tax on it in order to decrease the number of people who gambled, fine, that makes sense. But that's not what they're doing. They want to do it so that they can raise revenue so they don't have to tax the people who make $300,000 and write campaign donation checks to them in Montgomery County because they're afraid those people might vote for Larry Hogan.
Yeah, no, we see it the same way.
Yeah.
One of my issues has always been tax the bads, not the goods. And I would include bads are the billionaire class, what we want less of, right? And the issue with the deliveries, I guess what I'd like, and I know you would too, is walkable communities where people gather at the local coffee shop, the locally owned and operated coffee shop where workers are it's a cooperative or they're part of a union, that kind of community, bikeable communities, anything better than having more delivery vans, right, from
And look,
an
like
Amazon warehouse.
if that fee were to make sure that there were labor protections for those folks, if that fee were to make sure that there were health benefits for those folks, if that fee were to make sure that they had education benefits for their kids, like, I'm all good for that. I'm not good for it just going into the general fund so the Democrats can pass more of their pet projects and pass the cost on to the rest of us.
Or use it as an argument against raising taxes on the wealthy.
Right.
We have about 15, 20 more minutes left, and I have a lot to get to. So I want to just get through a couple more of the topics on this, and then we can get to a couple of other issues. I was really glad to hear you speak out against Maryland's complicity in the Gaza genocide by Israel. And I know the argument has been, well, it's not a lot of money that we spend on our, Maryland taxes go to the Maryland Israeli Development Center. To me, it's almost an issue of our state's soul. But I'd like you to respond to why this is something that you've talked about and focused on.
Yep. So, I mean, this is complicity in genocide has always been an issue for me. When I started the campaign, I was focused on Governor Hogan's anti-BDS executive order. And so I'm still focused on that. But over the course of the last year, I realized how much Maryland has invested in the continuation of war and genocide. And so the focus has to be on divestment just as much as it is on allowing people who choose to boycott to work with the state. So Maryland funds the Maryland Israel Development Center. It is a joint cooperation or joint collaboration between, I believe, the Department of Commerce and the government of Israel, and it produces startups and technology companies that contribute directly to the war and to the security state in Israel and in Gaza. And we should absolutely cut that off. We don't need to be complicit with genocide here in Maryland. It should not be the way that we go about being as part of the world. And, it's not just the MDIC. I mean, it is like the Governor Moore in his State of the State talked about the necessity for increasing the number of defense and arms makers who come here as an economy of the future. So if we're going to tolerate Maryland tax dollars going to support genocide right now, which Governor Moore seems not only welcome to do, but excited to do, then we also need to understand that in the future, we're tying our economy to war and genocide and his vision, and we shouldn't do that. It's morally wrong, it's ethically wrong, and it's not a great and lucrative business. I think another program that I would look at here is the joint venture between UMBC and I believe Tel Aviv University. These type of programs are very seldom good for the students, good for the college, good for the faculty, and instead are usually good for a donor who wanted the program created and gave a donation to the system in order to allow that. Well, so I would say that one of the things that we will do when we take office is evaluate the way that Maryland taxpayer dollars are directly contributing to genocide, and we will put forward legislation or executive orders to end those as soon as we can, because we shouldn't do it. It's not just a theoretical issue, it's a real issue of our tax dollars going in those places. I don't care if it's much money. We should not be putting any money toward genocide.
Yeah, I very well said. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add. I just really appreciate that you're talking about this issue because it's really close to me. And I know you've seen me go, people would say go on and on and on about how the crimes, the war crimes of Israel.
Yeah.
And I've been told I talk too much about it, but sorry. I mean,
Right.
that's all I can,
Like I was in Frederick a couple of weeks ago, and in Frederick they're trying to get a ceasefire resolution passed at the local level, and very good turnout. It was a first weekend in February. A group called Frederick Ceasefire Now that has been working and doing vigils every single weekend in downtown Frederick to remind people that there's still a genocide going on. Held a rally and a march, and I would say, over 100 people were in a church in Frederick talking about the necessity to commit to movements of peace, justice, and democracy, and how it starts at the local level. And it is a Frederick issue, right? It's a Maryland issue if our money is going to the MDIC. It's a Frederick issue if there's people who are in the community who are directly affected by it. And I think importantly, if you think about nuke freeze movements, or if you think about ending apartheid in South Africa, oftentimes these started as local issues when people gathered together in a church basement, played some songs, and rallied together because they knew that if they got their local leaders to care about it, they could get their state leaders to care about it. And if they got their state leaders to care about it, they could get their federal leaders to care about it. Too often we start at the top without understanding the kind of power that we need to build in order to get those kind of wins. And so kudos to the folks in Frederick that are taking on the MDIC, that are trying to get the local government as progressive as it tries to claim to be, to realize this is a local issue and it matters. It matters, it matters, it matters.
What about ballot access? 'Cause I want to get back to that issue, what you just brought up, sort of in a bigger context, which is starting at the community and then moving up. But just real quick, you're working on making it a little easier for Green Party candidates to run for office. That's what the ballot access, and not just Green Party, any, non-Republican party to run. So just briefly touch on that. And I put a pink question mark next to Moore there because he hasn't, as far as I know, given an opinion, but we can probably guess he wouldn't agree with it.
if we want to get out of the two-party system, quote unquote, the way to do that is to make it so there are more and healthier parties that voters can participate in, they can run for office in, and they can vote in. In order to do that, we have to make sure that they have access to the ballot. And each of the 50 states has different rules for what it takes to get on the ballot and how that works. Maryland's are okay compared to the rules that some of the other states in the nation have, but they're also not great. And so one of the places where we've really been focusing recently is that during the COVID lockdown, during the state of emergency, we were allowed to use electronic signatures. Instead of having to go to a farmer's market or something like that, I was able to send you an email and you were able to fill it out, and we could have that and submit it to the state. The state liked that, the Board of Elections liked that, election workers like that, and voters trying to use their constitutional right to sign one of those petitions like that. The Democrats in Annapolis don't like that, and it's not actually because of third parties, it's because of charter amendments. So they don't like democracy, they don't like grassroots democracy, and the way that they most feel it is through charter amendments. So they have fought us on that year over year. We keep bringing it up. Again, Delegate Ruth has sponsored a great bill for this called the Ballot Petition Modernization Act, and it seeks to do two things. One, it allows electronic petitions or electronic signatures on petitions, and that increases accessibility, that increases validity, and that increases ease for voters who are trying to use it. Two, it loosens the ridiculous restrictions on what a name has to be shaped like in order to count for a ballot petition. So if I wrote Andy Ellis on a petition, had my date of birth, my social security number, my address, all that other stuff, they could clearly tell who I was. Wouldn't have my social, but all that other stuff, and they could tell who I was, they'd throw it out because my name my government name is not Andy Ellis. And so if it doesn't match that exactly, they throw it out. And they throw it out to the tune of 30% of petition signatures that are turned in get rejected right now. So we are trying to make it so that more voters can more easily use their constitutional right in order to sign a petition and have it counted.
Right, and that includes the petition, right, for for the Green Party candidate to get access, but for any charter amendment, which you can understand why the lawmakers don't like it, because it allows voters to bypass them and pass bills that would benefit the voter. The legislator doesn't get credit, A, and B, the legislator loses their ability to leverage their power with corporations, with lobbyists, to get donations.
A challenge to their monopoly on power.
Yeah, no, it's really important, and we'll keep monitor whether more how he comes down on it. Maybe as governor he would have less of a stake, right, in opposing that type of legislation. So we'll see if maybe he does the right thing there. I got another comment, a question for you, Andy. Voters need to understand why green is the choice they're looking for. What methods and tactics in place are planned to get education out there? Thank you. Well, obviously doing this show, you do a lot of videos. Is there a kind of an overarching state or national strategy to build brand awareness?
So that's a great question, and I think it's absolutely essential that we do that. So a couple of the ways that we're working on that right now is we're doing these community meetings in libraries across the state. We've done one in Frederick so far. We've done one in Howard County. We've got one coming up February 22nd in LaVale and Western Maryland and Allegheny County. And so in advance of that, we're sending mail to everybody in the area who was once or currently a green. We're reaching out to people that we know that are on the Frostburg campus and that are involved in labor movements out there. So we'll be doing that. We're going to do those all across the state this year, and we're going to try to get to as many counties as we possibly can. We're also going to go out to fairs and festivals and farmers markets across the state and let people know that they have a real choice and that they have a real opportunity, and not just a choice that is different, but a choice that they're not just a choice, but a choice that offers distinct solutions and lines up with working people's values. So we're going to be doing that. And then, we're working on trying to get the social media part of this up and running. I had a great conversation with a young woman who came to our launch last night, and she's a Instagram person in a way that like I really appreciate, but I could never do on my own. And she's going to help us figure out how to get an Instagram strategy going. We've got other folks working on different parts of the web and social media, and we're trying to do events, we're trying to show up, we're trying to do podcasts like this, and we're trying to get as much media as we can so folks know not just that they have a choice, but it's a choice with solutions that are transformative and the values that align with theirs.
Yeah, that's a really great answer, Andy. I'm glad to hear all that. I was not aware. Some of the questions I asked Andy, I've discussed a little bit, so I might have an idea where he's going. I didn't know you guys were doing all that. And that is a good response to folks who say, well, I don't see the Green Party. They run every 4 years and then they disappear. So that's really, really good stuff as far as I'm, for whatever it's worth, my opinion, for my 2 cents. So I wanted to just show this. So Butch Ware has a national name now because he ran alongside of Jill Stein for president. He was as her vice presidential choice. And now he's announced he's running for governor of California. You're running for Maryland governor. Does it make sense? Let me put it a little different. Doesn't it make sense though to maybe focus? And I'm not saying you guys shouldn't do what you're doing, but what about the community offices? You mentioned that we need to start the charter movement, the charters and other areas at the local level have real impact. What about running for, say, a mayor of a small town as a Green, or running for a county council?
Yeah.
Where's that?
Yeah, great. So this is a great question. So Butch and I are both members of the Green Party of the United States Coordinated Campaign Committee. And that is a 10-person committee that is elected at the national level. And it is me, it is Butch, it is Chibu Asion, who ran for Congress in Illinois last year, Gloria Matera, who used to run or who has run in the past for Lieutenant Governor of New York, and a bunch of other candidates together working to help create a coordinated strategy for Greens outside of the presidential election and outside of congressional elections. Different committees handle those things. So what we discussed last night at our first meeting of 2025 is a strategy that focuses on a couple of things. Races like Butch's and I's that can put out platforms for Greens to offer transformative visions at a state level, but also campaign for small local offices, for parks boards, for library boards, for town councils, for town mayors, and things like that. So that while we are defining the party at the statewide level with the governor's races and the state delegates and things like that, and using the resources that come from a race like that to build infrastructure, to build platform, to build vision, we are also simultaneously supporting people in small municipal races and things like that where we can win. We have a lot of Greens who are actually elected to those positions and governing, and we want to get better at helping identify those elections, get people elected in them, and make sure that they're showing outcomes that matter to people's lives. But for us right now, and like I said, we just had our first meeting of this committee for the year last night. We had some newly elected folks on it, including Butch. But for us right now, the idea is to figure out how to run that dual strategy where we run important races like mine and Butch's that draw a lot of attention and help to bring resources and people to the party at the same time that we're developing a bench of people who are making a real difference in their local communities by running and winning for those positions that oftentimes have the most immediate impact on people's lives.
All right, we're going to end the program, not yet, but when we do, we're going to go out with your vision, which you presented in the state of the state. I didn't want to spend a lot of time showing video of you because we have you, so why should I show video? But I really was glad you focused on a real vision, because the Democrat Party, again, trying to defeat something MAGA with nothing, just how bad MAGA is, and you're not going to, that's not how you win. So my question, though, is this. You talked about what you're doing within the Green Party. One of my profound disappointments has been the failure of self-described, self-proclaimed progressive groups like the one I work for, Our Revolution, Progressive Democrats of America, and environmental groups, they just simply refuse to break with the Democratic Party, no matter what, no matter how bad the Democrats are. Do you have any vision for winning any of them over? Is it even worth trying? And why are they so tied to the Democrats? Is it because, and I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but I have my own thoughts. And is it because the leadership of those groups personally gain from a tie to the Democratic Party? They view themselves as potentially joining, running for office as Democrats, having influence within the party, while the rank and file get nothing.
Yeah, look, so I think there's some of that. I think especially in Maryland, where a lot of advocacy at the General Assembly level happens based on access to elected people. They're afraid to step out because their fundraising is tied to them going to Annapolis and testifying on a bill, taking a picture of everybody, putting it in their newsletter and sending it out, right? That's the funding model that they have. And especially in Maryland, where it's a one-party state and access to Democratic legislators is essential to get your bill written, probably even if not passed. That's a huge part of it. I think a second part of it is right now, Greens, I don't think Greens have done a great job of articulating an explanation of how voting for us, working for us, and collaborating with our candidates helps them to achieve the goals that their members and their organizations have. So some of it is the insularity of these types of organizations. Some of it is structural. Some of it is clearly just self-benefit. They benefit from it. Some of it is also we need to be better at explaining how having us come to their rally, if they're not getting what they need from the current governor or the current mayor, helps them to build the kind of leverage in order to get the outcomes that they want. So we need to be better at explaining our theory of action for them, and they need to be better at being willing to break from a party that never gives them what they need and kicks the can down the road every time.
Yeah, you're a little bit more generous to the leadership of some of these groups than I'm, at least on this podcast.
Well,
Real quick break just from our discussion. I have been following the Tulsi Gabbard nomination. I have come out strongly in support of her nomination for two reasons. One, anyone else I think would be far worse. And two, I actually think she has some pretty good ideas, and she's certainly better by far than the Biden director of national intelligence. So I'm pleased that she did get confirmed. Bernie voted against her, and Glenn Greenwald said that he was a coward, that he voted against her knowing full well that she was better than anyone else Trump would nominate, and that his failure to do so reflected his bending the knee to the Democratic Party, his cowardice. Is that fair, Andy? I mean, I admire Bernie. Do you think it's fair to say he is a coward because he voted against the Gabbard nomination?
I have been paying attention to a lot of things recently, but the Tulsi Gabbard nomination is not one of them. Okay. So, I don't really have an answer on this that is, I don't have a good answer on this that is going to be on the level of where you and Greenwald have been looking at it. I will say and remind folks that in 1999, when Bernie was supporting the operation of NATO to bomb Kosovo and to kill civilians in Yugoslavia, me and several other people at the University of Vermont went to sit in at his office. We had been to Jeffords' office. We had been to Leahy's office. They gave us cookies. They got on the call with us. Bernie's staff had us arrested. Bernie's staff had us arrested for trespassing, and it set my impression of Bernie very early on, about who he was. I still really appreciate him. I still think that he does a lot of good things, and I think that he helped define a possibility of a new kind of vision for a new kind of politics at the presidential level in America. But since then, I've never had the same impression that many other people have of Bernie. I have always seen him as a progressive and a strong voice for many things, but I don't think he was for peace at the time, and it has helped to influence how I see him going forward.
Yeah, just to pile on that, I would just say I admire a lot of things that Bernie's done. I don't have an anecdote where I disagree with him particularly, but I think what you're describing and this vote points up again the need for a truly viable, truly credible third party,
Yep,
alternative
absolutely.
party, emerging
Yep,
party.
absolutely. A party that can give power to the voice of the people who do not support war, who do not support genocide, who do not support inequality, and who do not support a laissez-faire approach to climate. Like, we need a party that can give power to those folks and instead of telling them to wait their turn or get out of the way while the Democratic Party runs to the right and tries to be like Larry Hogan and Liz Cheney.
All right, here's your end, I believe, to pretty much the end of the response to the State of the State. And folks who want to hear and see all of it, please go to Andy's website, gogreen26.com. We'll get a final word from him after we play this clip.
For everyone. We need a movement with the courage to imagine a different world and the power to transform Maryland. Over the next 2 years, we will work with Marylanders of every political affiliation across the state to offer a green vision rooted in justice, peace, democracy, and ecological wisdom. It will include a transparent and progressive taxation system that will fund schools, housing, transportation, climate action, all while reducing the burden on working class people and families and making clear and honest declarations of the amount of tax people will need to pay for each of the policies that we pass. It will include an agenda for a solidarity economy to transition beyond dependence on the federal government and toward an economy repairing and revitalizing Maryland's working communities. It will include a path to multi-party democracy in Maryland to ensure more voices are heard, more people are represented, and more solutions are part of the debate. It will include a vision of public safety that does not start and end with police and prisons, but starts with communities and ends with real safety. It will include a plan for climate resilience and reconstruction that makes polluters pay, prepares Marylanders for a just transition and a future beyond fossil fuels. Look, I'm not a career politician. I'm not a member of the 1% like Moore and Hogan. I'm a working class Marylander who, like all of you, is worried about my family, my friends, and my community as we face these crises. I don't know what the future holds or how it will treat us. It seems like it's going to be pretty rough, the way the Democrats and Republicans are approaching the state. But what I do know is this: when we say power to the people and we work together with the courage to imagine and the power to transform, we can build a Maryland that works for everyone. That's the message. Together, we can build something better. Together, we can build something that works for everyone. Thank you and have a good night. I appreciate the opportunity to make this address, to reply to the governor, and look forward to continuing the debate as we go forward.
All right, really strong stuff, Andy. I really appreciate that. Anything you want to throw on top of that?
Yeah, sure. So we are looking to work with as many people as we can in order to shape this vision. And that means people who have ideas about policy. That means people who are connected to problems on the ground and their community. That means people who are doing the work right now. And it also means people who are better at video staging and editing than I am. I don't love, when I watch that video, I like the words I'm saying. I don't like the way it comes across. And I don't have anybody on my team right now who can help me set up a video like that. Although after it came out, several people reached out and offered help on it. So we are willing to take any kind of help that we can.
You mean they reached out because they like you so much that they felt like, you know, that you were who they want to work with, or were they like, this guy really needs
No, they were like, hey, I love what you're saying. The message is spot on. The presentation in that video could have been better.
It was your looking wasn't, I didn't want to say anything about that, but yeah, the look wasn't ideal, but the words are so powerful, and that's what matters, I think. But unfortunately, humans are, we are visual, we're reactive. I mean, so you have to.
It matters, Hal, and that's why I was touched to see people reaching out and saying, like, hey, I want to volunteer. I can help you make the videos better, because the words are important and the words are powerful, and we don't want to let the videos or whatever it is get in the way of that. So I say that to say that there's a place for everybody in this movement, and as we work together and as we build together, we can build a politics with the power to imagine and the courage to transform, so that we can have a better Maryland, so that we are not forced with the choice between Wes Moore and Larry Hogan, and where we can actually have a choice that is for the people and for the people that have been left behind, and for the people who want to build together, so that we can all thrive. And so, like, thank you for showing that. I appreciate it. If anybody wants to volunteer, if anybody has an idea, if anybody wants to help, you can go to the website, www.gogreen26.com. Let me know what you're interested in, and we'll get you plugged in a way that works for you. If you have an idea you want to share, send it our way, and we'll talk to you about it and see what we can do about it. And if you want us to come visit your town, your area, or something like that, let me know, and we'll figure out how to make that happen too.
All right, Andy, I appreciate that so much. I won't come back on screen. We will fade out at this point, and I will be back tomorrow with much more Halitics. Thanks again, Andy Ellis. Andy Ellis for Governor 2026. Go Green 2026.